Hello, everyone. My name is Isidoro Hasbun, and I'm a student at the Virginia Tech Center for Public Administration and Policy. And I'm presenting to you a brief overview of pragmatism and its relationship with the field of public administration, its history, and its current applications. So let's go to an intro of pragmatism first. So pragmatism, in many ways, is an idea about ideas. It sees ideas as forks, knives, microchips, tools that enable us to predict, solve problems, and reach a certain truth. These ideas enables us to communally reach a certain conclusion about particular concepts, and like germs, they're dependent on their carriers in the environment. Ideas must be adaptable, and key here is that an idea's survival does not depend on its immutability, its ability to withstand change. Instead, an idea must be able to adapt and refine itself to current times. And it showcases a change in American life. Pragmatism was created or established as a formal philosophical movement at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, and it's considered the United States' most unique contribution to the world of philosophy. It really helped cope people in a heterogeneous industrialized society to adapt from those older bonds of custom and community that occurred in this transitional period, fundamental period in the United States after the Civil War. So it really peaked in the early 20th century, and as you can see here, these are what most people consider the three founders of pragmatism: Charles Sanders Peirce, John Dewey, and William James. Patricia Shields cites Commager and says that John Dewey became the guide, the mentor, and the conscience of the American people. It's scarcely an exaggeration to say that for a generation, no major issue was clarified until Dewey had spoken and showed the important role that pragmatism had on education, particularly an area where John Dewey excelled in. So let's go a little bit in terms of the overlap. There's two sides to in terms of the debate of how pragmatism and public administration related. One is that they overlapped in founding. That public administration overlapped consistently with pragmatism and internalized it. And there's various examples. For example, John Dewey, board member and co-founder of Hull House, worked to improve Chicago neighborhood conditions. This activism helped with suffrage, child labor laws, and juvenile courts. And the NAACP lists Dewey among its founders. Also importantly, Oliver Wendell Holmes, as a practitioner of pragmatism, led a legal school of thought that recognized how experience and uncertainty shape legal decisions and create a law that evolves, so fundamental in the Supreme Court. So public administration faces problematic situations every day, and really finds in pragmatism a philosophical movement that in many ways is fits right with the field, particularly today, in today's age. But nevertheless, there's another camp that says that pragmatism had a minimal role in the founding of public administration. Maybe only Mary Parker Follett had some pragmatist currents in their work, but initially public administration was pursuing administrative expertise, that is, on knowing what to do exactly, and precluded significant attention to pragmatism's more open-minded and fluid and contextual approach to administrative actions. So, there were nevertheless some scholars that touched on pragmatism in the mid 20th century, but even before, unfortunately, it seems that pragmatism wasn't that fundamental to the field explicitly. It's a kind of that division between experimenting and expertise, Snyder would state. And fundamental to pragmatism in public administration today is really that focus on a community of inquiry, a group of individuals involved in this process of solving a problematic situation, and the methodology that pragmatism established is innovative just because of the social quality of knowledge formation in the sciences, something that in the last 50 years or so really has been established within the history of science. But beforehand, it was not really that clear that science is really a social process, and that truth in many ways evolves communally, and that's how science evolves piecemeally, little by little, to achieve a particular and solve a particular knowledge gap. So communities linked, and there's a scientific attitude to these problematic situations, and community as participatory democracy is really the simplest and most profound component of the community of inquiry for public administration practice. It's really that democratic way of communicating. Democracy is a way of life, and that in itself is a fundamental element in the movement and philosophical tradition of pragmatism. Camilla Stivers discusses the role of, for example, the listening bureaucrat as an agent of democracy, responsiveness, and she argues that listening as an embodied ability, a way of knowing, and potential administrative capacity helps shape, revive responsiveness, and avoid passivity. So mutual responsiveness is an essential component in participatory democracy, and it's fundamental in the philosophical tradition of pragmatism. An example, of pragmatism in day-to-day is pragmatism and COVID. So there's epistemological standoffs and contested symbolism in terms of how people and policymakers dealt with COVID. Policy might have unfolded differently with better outcomes had some core pragmatist principles, namely fallibilism, which is acknowledging the science as fallible, anti-reductionism, embracing complexity, attention to the concrete and the particular, experimentalism in the real world, aligning knowledge and action, epistemological pluralism, attention to human meaning-making and narrative, rationality, and participatory democracy have been applied. Really is just acting in that face of uncertainty, making a real-world change and seeing what happens, embracing multiple types of evidence, and attending carefully to what makes meaning truthful to people. And deep divisions emerge in the pandemic between advocates of the precautionary principle, who argued that face masks for the lay public might work and are unlikely to harm, and those who espoused evidence-based masking policies, arguing that pending definitive scientific evidence from randomized controlled trials, masks should not be recommended and certainly not mandated. There was this debate, for example, in the masking question, and it could have been more productively addressed had there been greater consideration on the potential adverse consequences of not acting, greater epistemological pluralism, and which wider scientific voices were invited, and closer attention to the symbolic meanings which masks were coming to hold for certain groups in society. So here, we see a clear case where pragmatism could have definitely had a fundamental role in terms of how policymakers dealt with COVID-19 if they had incorporated elements of pragmatism in their approach. So, in conclusion, pragmatism was designed to make it harder for people to be driven to violence by their beliefs. The founders wished to avoid violence they had experienced hidden in abstraction. After the Civil War, individuals wanted to try to leave that past behind, and pragmatism found fertile ground afterwards just because of the flexibility of its ideas and the advances in American society at that time, and how it really was an incredible moment in American history where there was really a lot of skepticism about any finality of a particular set of beliefs. Really, afterwards, it declined, but once the Cold War ended in the late 1980s, early 1990s, pragmatism found fertile ground in terms of democratic principle, democratic governance, and the value that validates all other values is democracy, keeping the experimenting going. So pragmatism in many ways is a 19th century way of thinking that occurred at a time of great change like the one we're in today. And that's why in many ways it could be useful to today's public administration. But that's a discussion that's still taking place in the field and is being debated. So I hope I provided you with a little clarity on this really complicated topic that I could be speaking for hours about. But it's really an interesting concept in terms of how its approach and inclusion within the field of public administration, and the many tools that could be gathered from this philosophical tradition and way of thinking, and its approach to truth making, to democracy, to ways of knowing. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and looking forward to any questions, and thank you so much.